Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Hannah if you're new here, and in today's video I'm talking all things stats. Putting together all of these graphs and statistics was a lot of fun, but also a lot of work for me. I'm really happy I was able to track so many stats this year, and going into 2023, a lot of my tracking will be very similar to 2022. Without further ado, let's talk the nitty, the gritty, the details. And at the end of this video, I'm going to compare this year's numbers, 2022, to my previous 2 years of tracking. So stay tuned for that. In 2022, I read 211 books, which is an obscene number, and it is the most I've read in any year. We'll get into that later. Of those 211 books, my average star rating was a 3.96. Very high star rating for me. The reason my star rating is so high is because I am a rereader. I tend to reread a lot of books, and a lot of my favorites that I reread end up being 5 stars. Even taking my rereads out of the equation and just doing the average of all of the new books that I read this year, my average star rating is still 3.9. So I not only loved a lot of books this year, but I chose not to finish books that I wasn't going to like. I am a liberal DNFer. I'm a mood reader. I'm a person who, if I get to a point in a book and I'm just not feeling it, or I can tell that the book isn't going to be for me by the end, I tend to say, you know what? I'm going to put this down because if I finish it, I'm just going to give it a low rating, and I don't want to bring that energy into my life. I only want to devote time and energy into books that I think I'm going to really, really love. Even 3-star books, where I'm getting to the middle of the book, I'm like, this is just okay. Sometimes I would put those books down as well, which is why my average star rating looks so high. And in terms of a graph for this, I will flash that up here. I'm even gonna move over. I will put up the bar graph of all of the star ratings that I did this year for all the books that I read, and I will read you off how many books I gave what star. So if I'm looking down at my notes, that's why. I gave one book 1 star, one book a 1.5 star, 8 books 2 star, 13 2.5 stars, 23 books were 3 stars, 26 books were 3.5 stars, 57 4-star reads, 23 4.5 star reads, and 59 5-star books. So that's what this looks like. This is why my ratings are so high. I typically don't rate things 1 or 2 stars, which is great for me. I'm pretty happy with these numbers, and I hope that my 2023 year continues to look kind of like an upward trajectory towards that 5-star for me personally. A couple of quick numbers I do want to go over. I had a few goals related to number of books for particular goals, so I will just run through those very quickly. I read 72 books with a queer main character in them. I had a goal that was to read roughly 50% books by queer authors and 50% books written by BIPOC authors, and 72 queer books is pretty close. I want to keep reading queer books and prioritizing those books in my reads. I read 30 books with trans representation. That is a really great number. My goal was 10. And I read 10 books with polyamory representation, and my goal was 10. Not as much as I would have loved to do more, but I still achieved that goal. I read 59 books with disability representation prominent in the book, and my goal again was 10. I read 11 nonfiction books this year, and my goal was 20, so I really need to focus and prioritize nonfiction, and in 2023 I plan on reading 1 nonfiction book a month. If you'd like to see what my 2023 goals are in totality, I have a video up for that already on my channel. Going back to my goal about books written by Black, Indigenous, and people of color, this goal I was able to achieve. 50%, almost exactly, of the authors that I read were people of color. and I'm really proud of this. This was really hard to achieve. A lot of this had to do with how much manga I consumed. However, this is still something I want to keep in mind going forward. Publishing is predominantly, at least in the United States, predominantly white, and I want to continue to diversify my shelves and prioritize authors of all races and ethnicities and sexualities. I did try to track nationality of a lot of these authors, and as you can see, a lot of them are from the United States, and I'm not totally surprised by this. I live in the United States, so a lot of the books that I read primarily are from my home country. However, this is something I might keep tracking this in the future just to see if I can read more outside of my home country in the future. So that's what the nationality looks like. Next, we have format. I primarily read audiobooks because of my disability. 63% of the books that I consumed were via audio, which is 133 books, which is a lot. Thank you, library. I read 17 physical books, which was 8.1%, and 28.9% were ebooks, which totals 61 books. I definitely want to read more ebooks next year because I have an easier time like holding up a iPad or whatever and like propping it up somewhere, so I don't have to hold up the book as often. So I definitely want to continue reading ebooks, but also I want to get through my physical TBR. Speaking of the library, 69% of the books that I read came from the library, which is insane, and that is the most percentage-wise that I've gotten from the library in any year, as you'll see. I purchased 22 books, which was about 10%. I'm really happy with that number, and I owned already 42 books of the books that I read, which is 19.9% or 20%. So I'm pretty happy with that. I continuously support my library, and this will hopefully be about the same, if not more, in the future. Let's talk genre. This surprised the heck out of me. This is my genre graph. As you can see, the highest genre that I have is fantasy, but then things get interesting. I read 70 fantasy books, which is 33% of my reads. My next highest genre is romance, which is 26.5%, or 56 reads were romance, which is quite a few romance books. My next highest genre is horror, with 16.1%. I'm pretty surprised by that. That is a number that I was not anticipating, and I've been enjoying the horror genre quite a bit. I wouldn't call myself a horror reader, but I read 34 horror novels this year. Typically, one of my highest genres is sci-fi, and sci-fi is pretty low this year. Only 10% of the books that I read this year, or 23 books, were sci-fi. For 2023, I definitely miss sci-fi, so I want to read more sci-fi books, but I'm not really trying to outdo my numbers necessarily. I just want to maybe focus on that a little bit more. I still want to keep reading horror and romance and fantasy, but I kind of want to prioritize some sci-fi in 2023. And then a graph that I'm not really surprised by at all is the age range. I primarily read adult books nowadays. 18% of my reads were young adult, and I read one middle grade this year. 172 or 81.5% of the reads that I had this year were adult. Every year I read fewer and fewer young adult titles, and that's okay. Young adult just really needs to grab me at this point in my reading journey, but I still enjoy a young adult novel here and there. A lot of my rereads and a lot of my favorites are young adult, so I will never give up on this age range ever. Really quickly, I'll talk about how many books I reread versus new. 77% of the books that I read were new to me, which is 164, versus 47, which were rereads. Again, this is probably why my star rating is so high, but even taking my rereads out, I still rate things fairly highly. Lastly, I'm going to show page count and talk about the average page length per book that I read. My average page count was 339 pages per book, which typically I read between Most of the books I read are between 300 and 400 pages, so that's about right. I did read some huge books this year. 2 of the books that I read were over 1,000 pages, which I'm pretty proud of, not gonna lie. I don't really have a page count goal necessarily, or average page count goal. Just for a spot of interest, the total number of pages I read this year, according to my numbers, was 71,605. I don't know what that means. that means nothing to me in particular, but I just thought it was something interesting. Now in this section of video, I'm gonna really quickly talk about my previous 2 years of reading and comparing a few stats. I wasn't tracking every single thing for those 3 years, so there's not a ton of comparisons I can do, but here is what we can see thus far, and I'll just go through this really quickly. So in 2020, I read 111 books. In 2021, I read 208 books, and in 2022, I read 211. We're going up every year. I don't know, my reading goal is always 100, and I'm super happy when I hit that, but I would love to hit 200 again. My focus is primarily qualitative over quantitative. Next, we have total pages read. If you want to get an idea for page count, in 2020, it was roughly 45,000. 2021 was 66,000, and 2022 was 71,000. So the more books you read, typically, the higher the page count is. My average star rating is almost the same for all 3 years. In 2020, it was 4.1. In 2021, it was 3.98. And in 2022, it was 3.96. Very similar. I'm not surprised by these numbers at all. The average page count, however, is something interesting to me. So in 2020, my average page count was 412 pages, which is pretty high. And then 2021, it's 340. And then in 2022, 339. So those two numbers are almost the same. But I guess in 2020, I was reading some real big chonky books, which is probably why I had fewer books read total. Just thought that was interesting. I do want to talk about a few more stats. An interesting thing is my most read genre per year, and I'll talk about my top 3. I already touched on this a little bit in the genre section. In 2020, my most read genre in order was fantasy, science fiction, and nonfiction. I read a lot of nonfiction in 2020. In 2021, it was fantasy, then romance, then science fiction. And then in 2022, it's fantasy, romance, then horror, and then sci-fi. So I've been reading less and less sci-fi every year, which is making me sad. And I miss my sci-fi books just a little bit. But I am primarily a fantasy reader, as you can see. Another interesting comparative statistic for me is the percentage of how many books I was rereading versus new. So in 2020, 69% of the books that I read were new to me. In 2021, 70% were new to me, and in 2022, 77% of the books that I read were new. So my reread numbers are going down. I don't know what that means necessarily, I just thought that was interesting. Next and last, the comparative statistic that I'm most proud of is the use of the library. In 2020, 30% of the books that I read were from the library, which is still really solid. In 2021, 42% of the books that I read came from the library. Again, a great number. 2022, 70% or 69.5% of the books I read came from the library, which I think is incredible, and I'm really proud of that. And I want to continue supporting my local library as much as possible. Those are all my reading stats that I kept track of for the year of 2022, and comparing a few numbers for the previous 2 years. How did I do? What do you think? What do you think I should be tracking in 2023? Or what could I be doing differently in 2023 in terms of reading? I would love to know what your opinions are. Do you keep a reading spreadsheet somewhere? I would love to know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video of mine very soon. Bye!